The history of our flat earth, presented to you in rhyme, from ancient man's recordings to this present day in time. Every ancient culture written within their scriptures believed the earth was flat and still, from the Mayans to the Egyptians. The Vedics, Nords and Incas, to mention but a few. Come summer, autumn, winter, any season, they just knew that they were going nowhere, unlike the celestial bodies, like clockwork right above them, in the sky, no less than godly. They trusted their own senses and lived in harmony with the land, unlike us senseless morons who have failed to understand a need for symbiosis, an exchange of energy. It seems we have psychosis and derangement presently. Currently, we're as dirty as a species can ever go. So whatever shape our earth is, our relationship with it is low. So what happened in between to make us change our minds and to chop down everything that's green and forget we are divine? Let us take a peep at the foundations of our beliefs. Could they be made of sand and straw? I present to you the history in brief. Pythagoras of Samos, around 500 BC, a Greek mathematician and philosopher, took the lead. He entered uncharted territory and made his notions clear, theorising hypothetically that the earth could be a sphere. But few men in their nation took his notions far on board. Said to be the first Freemason by many folks, can't be ignored. Fast forward 100 years and we come to the brains of Plato, another Greek philosopher with a head like a mashed potato, who proposed the earth was spherical as well as being geocentric. Emphasis on the word theoretical, however well meant and authentic. His student Aristotle wrote a book called On the Heavens, presenting his new model that can be flattened in 60 seconds. He theorised that watching ships sailing over the horizon, as well as the cause of the eclipses, proved the curve, but he was no wise man. Because now with modern day telescopes, we can see this is just not the case. With multiple magnitude zoom lens, the ships stay in focus at the base. Lunar eclipses throughout history have been recorded on many occasions. To show up before reaching sunset, it was no mystery to the ancients, who spoke of a body called Rahu that was said to obscure the moon. How can it be the earth's shadows in these cases on a sunny afternoon? 250 BC, Eratosthenes, another Greek dude in his sticks, came up with a crazy hypothesis based on mere presumptions and tricks. He measured the light and the shadows with his sticks on parts of the plane, assuming the sun to be so far away. The conclusions were wrong once again. However, if we use plane trigonometry, the distance of the sun's not that far, which leads us to ponder the oddity of presumptions that seem quite bizarre. These notions were filed and forgotten for around 1500 odd years. Yet they teach this baloney in classrooms today without a revision. Oh dear. Fast forward to 1522 and we jump ahead to Ferdinand Magellan, an acclaimed Portuguese explorer who sailed the plane, not a melon. It was then claimed that circumnavigation meant the earth was a ball, not a plane, once again fooling their nations to fall for this globalist game. In 1543, Nicholas Copernicus, days before giving up the ghost, published his book on the revolutions of the celestial spheres. Now, that's close. Then came the Copernican revolution. Yet even by his own admission, he claimed it was just a hypothesis. Therefore, why should anyone listen? Danish astronomer Tycho Brahe argued against the proclaimed model. Unable to see stellar parallax, wrote Copernicus off as an oddball. At the beginning of the 17th century, Tycho Brahe began the construction of the largest ever observatory to date, with help of Emperor Rudolph's instruction. German astronomer Kepler was accepted as Brahe's apprentice. Kepler, however, was kept from astrodata, but his will was relentless. The two finally came to blows, and Kepler was turfed out of the joint. 1 year later, Mr. Brahe forgave him, to his detriment and final endpoint. 1 month later, Brahe dropped dead. Mercury found on his moustache. Kepler, the most likely culprit, must have been having a laugh. With access to all of the data and the observatory, he now had free rein, which he utilised, of course, to greaten his Copernican spiel once again. In 1609, astronomer Galileo Galilei purchased one of the first telescopes his misinfo still put out today. Interpreting observations based on the Copernican dream, assumptions are by no means foundations, and things aren't always what they seem. Then came the next bright spark, Newton, with his convenient theory of gravity. Knowing that if the earth spun around, we would all be in major calamity. So he pondered this under an apple tree, and one day one fell on his head, followed by a sci-fi catastrophe. For generations we have all been misled. 'Cause no one has ever found a graviton. It's all just speculation and theory. Just as we witnessed a hot air balloon, buoyancy is the force at play clearly. He claimed that this very same G-force was responsible for dragging a ball around our celestial body, the sun. Right, of course, it makes no sense at all. In 1773, Captain Cook, the first modern explorer, circled the Antarctic wall in search for a gap in the border. His journey took 3 years for completion, on a 60,000-mile trip. It is wise then to believe with good reason that they reached the edge with their ship. In 1783, the hot air balloon was invented, and the horizon rose to eye level, you see, as they floated in mid-air, suspended. Prominent writers gave accounts of what they were able to see. To their very shock and astonishment, the earth appeared as flat as can be. Then came good old Henry Cavendish in the year 1797, who came up with some really outlandish pseudo-scientific suggestions. Hanging big balls side by side, suspended in his shed, in attempt to prove Newton's gravity by observing the motions of lead. Good old well-to-do British, full of balls, only a hint of brain. His experiment was questioned by critics and never repeated successfully again. In the mid-1900s, a Frenchman named Gaspard Gustave Coriolis pioneered another extension to the fairy tale, and many now know this. By flushing water down a sink, he believed this pale demonstration gave proof of a ball earth that spins round and round, but it had zilch to do with location. His experiments were inherently flawed, down to their very foundation, because every sink has a unique size and shape, hence results were a big fabrication. In 1864, a doctor named Samuel Rothbottom shook up the flat plane once more, presenting his views not so common. His book was called Earth Not a Globe, and stirred up the scientific community. By observing what is under our nose, it is clear what we are taught is just lunacy. He conducted a number of experiments involving the Bedford Canal, accumulating a pile of evidence, demonstrating with great rationale that water remains at a level, that water just does not curve. Samuel, an early flat earth rebel, came equipped with a whole lot of nav. In 1861, George Airy conducted the Airy's failure, effectively disproving Earth's rotation. The findings were not in his favour. The Michelson-Morley experiment could not prove Earth's speed through space. Once again, it provided more evidence that the Earth don't move. Time to lose face. Lady Elizabeth Blunt, upon Samuel Rothbottom's passing, founded the Synthetic Society, along with a journal long-lasting. Then came the work of William Carpenter, 100 Proofs the Earth Not a Globe, demonstrating the shortfall of curvature and keeping mainstream on its toes. In 1892, Alex Gleason published a flat map of the world, in hope that for all the right reasons, it would replace other maps in a whirl. In 1893, Gleason published his book, Is the Bible from Heaven? And Is the Earth a Globe? For the public at large, posing two fundamental key questions. In 1899, Tim Winship published Synthetic Cosmogony, a South African man with intrinsic information, yet another great prodigy. In 1903 marked the beginning of those magnificent men and their planes, demonstrating that the Earth doesn't spin and that we live on a stationary plane. The famous Sagnac experiment was an extension of Michelson-Morley, and if ever you were seeking out evidence for a still Earth, then this is one surely. In 1914, William Westwood wrote the book, Does the Earth Rotate? No, followed by the brilliance of Hickson and his flat Earth book, Kings Dethroned. The Nicholson-Gale experiment vouched for a stationary Earth. The establishment were getting quite desperate, as the people saw the flaws in their work. In 1916, Albert Einstein had his moment, but not an epiphany, and put a new twist to the timeline with his theory of relativity. His notions were used to invalidate those previous inconveniences, so the guys with agendas could dominate and pass off eccentrics as geniuses. The top dogs knew the game was a farce, and Einstein no more than a jester. What is it like to be a genius? He was asked. He replied, You'll have to ask Nikola Tesla. Next, in the 1930s, a Christian named Wilbur Oliver clearly and surely asserted the reasons to be a flat earth believer. He broadcasted from his radio station that stretched all the way to Australia and lectured across the whole nation on the globe myths and all of its failures. He offered up $500 to anyone who could surely disprove that the earth was as flat as a pancake and that it's fixed and just doesn't move. But nobody took up his offer. Till his death, not one single taker. So maybe, deep down, people knew the globe pishers are salesmen fakers. After the Second World War, German scientists formed a group known as NASA, an acronym for Not a Space Agency. So sorry if that leaves your world shattered. Arthur C. Clarke, in his fiction book, spoke of the fantasy satellites. 1 decade later, the Aerocrooks supposedly sent one into the night. floating in low Earth oblivion, unfazed by the thermosphere's heat. Apply logic and the concept is silly, and more like a con than concrete. The International Flat Earth Research Society was founded by Samuel Shenton. In the late 50s he lectured in schools and on telly and attracted attention. An astronaut by the name of Gus Grissom spoke openly about all of his doubts, that NASA would make it to the face of the moon. He was later removed, taken out. In 1969, Neil Armstrong was the first man to not land on the moon. I'm sorry to say, beg your pardon, if you believe that, you've been very well groomed. Then came the famous blue marble, a supposed photo of Earth from the heavens, which many today are still marvelling, which was no more than an artist's impression. To ensure that all flat Earth inquiries in the future were met with fake leads. In 1970, Leo Ferrari sent them all barking up the wrong tree. With his invention of the Flat Earth Society, which he founded to promote the deception, by using flawed arguments unjustifiably, the globe Earth defender's best weapon. In 1971, Samuel Shenton parted this physical plane, paving the way for Charles Johnson, the next Flat Earth hero of his day. Charles and his vocal wife, Marjorie, launched into print Flat Earth News, speaking of Flat Earth and big pharmacies, and vivisection, and unspoken taboos. Johnson called out Leo the liar for turning Flat Earth into a joke. Then one day Johnson's house set on fire, along with their books up in smoke. In 2001 Johnson died, along with his legit information. Leo the liar left to muddy the waters, with his nonsense to dupe every nation. Then came Eric Dubay, who published The Atlantean Conspiracy in 2008 to convey topics such as geocentricity. In 2014, Dubay published his book, The Flat Earth Conspiracy. Shortly after, the public were hooked, but still fighting to regain their lost liberties. To begin with, the people were sceptical, and many conducted experiments. Rather than responding with ridicule, together they compiled more evidence. And now, for the first time in history, the people are joining in union, en masse, to piece together the mysteries in their millions, like the story of Truman. We are living in mutable times, false doctrines about to be lifted, and so we shall know once again with divine, and in due course the veil shall be lifted. For centuries, the truth rarely spoken, and lies have been written in bold. So remember to keep your mind open, but question everything you are told.